Marlowe's Edward II is a history play mapping the intricate web of passion and power struggles between King Edward, his favourite Gaveston, his wife Isabella, and Isabella's lover Mortimer Jr. Each shows their selfish motivations, their disregard for their duties to the greater good of the kingdom, and each is ultimately punished for their shortcomings. The disturbance to the status quo and the deviance from what was expected of these characters in regards to their class and gender brings about interesting debates on the authority of the monarchy at a time when the monarch was a woman. Marlowe's stance on such subjects can be gleaned mostly from the changes he made to the history. Marlowe's main sources for Edward II were Grafton's A Chronicle at Large, Holinshed's Chronicles, and Stowe's Annals of England. I would argue that Marlowe's manipulations of these texts showed that he was not so much concerned with the commenting on the divine right of kings, but rather the place a woman had in the royal court. There are two power plots between lovers that take place throughout the play parallel to each other, the first between Gaveston and King Edward, and the latter between Mortimer and Queen Isabella, and each brings their own political and moral dilemmas. In the relationship between Edward, a king, and Gaveston, a commoner, it is Gaveston who has the power over the king, and this is made very clear at the beginning of the play.
I must have wanton poets, pleasant wits, musicians that with touching of a string may draw the pliant king which way I please. Music and poetry is his delight. Therefore I'll have Italian masques by night, sweet speeches, comedies, and pleasing shows. And in the day when he shall walk abroad, like sylvan nymphs my pages shall be clad. My men, like satyrs grazing on the lawn, shall with their goat feet dance an antic hay. Sometimes a lovely boy in Dian's shape, with hair that gilds the water as it glides, crownets of pearl about his naked arms, and in his sportful hands an olive tree, to hide those parts which men delight to see, shall bathe him in a spring. And there, hard by, one like Actaeon peeping through the grove, shall by the angry goddess be transformed, and running in the likeness of an hart, by yelping hounds pulled down, shall seem to die. Or such things as these best please his majesty, my lord.
The class of Gaveston is the source of the conflict between the couple and Edward's council, and interestingly, their homosexual relationship is not seen as an issue until they demand that it be public and acknowledged. In fact, Mortimer Jr. does clearly state that the nature of their relationship is not the issue.
Leave now to oppose thyself against the king. The mightiest kings have had their minions. Great Alexander loved Hephaestion. The conquering Hercules for Hylas wept. Well, not kings only, but the wisest men. The Roman Tully loved Octavius, grave Socrates, wild Alcibiades. Then let his grace, whose youth is flexible, and promiseth as much as we can wish, freely enjoy that vain light-headed earl, for riper years will wean him from such toys.
Uncle, his wanton humour grieves not me. But this I scorn, that one so basely born should by his sovereign's favour grow so pert, and rioted with the treasure of the realm, while soldiers mutiny for want of pay. While others walk below, the king and he from out a window laugh at such as we, and flout our train, and jest at our attire. Uncle, this makes me impatient.
But nephew, now you see the king is changed.
And so am I, and live to do him service. But whilst I have a sword, a hand, a heart, I will not yield to any such upstart. You know my mind.
This is the first of the few alterations that Marlowe makes to the sources he borrows from, as he actually makes Gaveston a lower class than he was reported as being. His quick rise in class was a controversial move, but it is greatly exaggerated in the play. By Edward showering Gaveston in titles, he is undermining his own power and authority by threatening the class structure that keeps him and his council in power. In the eyes of the audience, Edward is shown to be a weak king immediately, fawning over his favourite and consistently ignoring matters of state to inquire of Gaveston. Not once throughout the play is the monarch established to be appointed by God. The divine right of kings and the dilemma of deposition of a sovereign appointed by God is not referenced. There is no debate amongst the conspirators over whether or not their actions would be considered blasphemous, though to an early modern audience this would have been important. Marlowe's omission of all reference to the divine right of kings and his lowering of the class status of Gaveston, Baldock, and Spencer from that of their models in Holinshed, only emphasises the arbitrary, even whimsical basis for political power in the world of the play. The issue of deposition is a prominent one, even though it is removed from a religious debate. Edward is a weak king, and though he is called tyrannical, we don't actually see this throughout the play. Instead, we see Edward regularly throwing away his title and his kingdom and being subservient to his favourites.
If this content you not make several kingdoms of this monarchy and share it equally amongst you all, so I may have some nook or corner left to frolic with my dearest Gaveston.
This is not the actions of a king, and Edward's hysterical behaviour feeds into the claim I made earlier that Marlowe's criticism is not focused on the divine right of kings, but rather a woman's place in court. Edward is often feminised throughout the play. Going back to Gaveston's speech at the beginning, Gaveston gives himself the role of hero, the male, and Edward, Leander, the female. Edward's language is also more feminine, especially when referring to Gaveston, which leads somewhat back to the homoerotic relationship depicted and the implications of sodomy. The feminization of Edward is tied to the sodomy, but it is not a product of it. Rather, it is the manifestation of Edward's more subservient character by Marlowe. The sodomy is used as a scapegoat by the conspirators, as whilst it is a central part of Edward's execution, it is not the sodomy but rather the disturbance to the class structure that spurred the rebellion, at least on Mortimer's part. For Isabella, her actions are purely driven by jealousy. The affair between Isabella and Mortimer is a mirror of Edward and Gaveston. Both sovereigns are the submissive role in the relationship, and Gaveston and Mortimer both relish in the power that their sexual relationships with the royals gives them. By drawing a political parallel between Edward's love for Gaveston and Mortimer's dangerous alliance with Isabella, Marlowe undermines any attempt to distinguish homosexual from heterosexual desire on moral grounds. Instead, they are a shared threat to the strict early modern gender roles, binding them as weak rulers. It's safe to say that Marlowe is not known for his female characters, and whilst Isabella is by far his most prominent female role, she is merely a caricature of a woman. She is ruled by her emotions and her jealousy, and is constantly stripped of her political power throughout the play. Some of the most obvious manipulations of the original sources used are in regards to Isabella. Grafton's A Chronicle at Large is very sympathetic towards Isabel, and depicts her as a victim and a national hero for deposing Edward. Holinshed's Chronicles and Stowe's Annals of England, however, are far more critical. To quote Holinshed, "But alas, what will not a woman be drawn and allured unto, if by evil counsel she once assaulted? And what will she leave undone, though never so inconvenient to those that should be most dear unto her, so her own fancy and will be satisfied? And how hardly is she revoked from processing an evil action, if she have once taken a taste of the same?" The early modern woman was, needless to say, not thought of well. They were seen as erratic, ruled by emotion, and naturally drawn to evil. Holinshed and Stowe both depict Isabel as conniving, an unnatural queen, and thereby a natural woman. Marlowe borrows from Grafton in the first half, making her to be the sympathetic victim of betrayed love, but in the second half she becomes Holinshed and Stowe's evil queen. Despite her pleadings in the first half of the play that she is faithful to Edward and loves him deeply, she is revealed to be in an affair with Mortimer later on, though we don't know for sure when this started. The hypocrisy that Isabella shows undercuts her motives of rebellion. Her reasons are selfish, making her no better than Edward. Marlowe's punishment for Isabella is also far more severe than in any of the sources, a punishment that Marlowe seems to think she deserves. Isabel, according to the histories, was placed under house arrest, her lands confiscated, but remained on good terms with her son who visited regularly. However, in the play, Isabella is publicly shamed and denounced by her son, and taken off stage to await execution. The commentary on the role of women in the royal court seems to be clear, and perhaps more relevant given that the ruling monarch at the time was Elizabeth I, and commentary on whether or not this was natural was prevalent. Both Edward and Isabella are shown to be weak for allowing their emotions to rule them. Their exaggerated femininity becoming their downfall shows in no uncertain terms that Marlowe perceived women to be a threat to the authority of the monarch, and had no place in power. Edward II suggests that passion is a feminine emotion capable of tainting masculine right rule when it appears in bad male monarchs, and confirming the villainy of feminine power when it appears in queens and authority. The status quo is reintroduced with Edward III executing Mortimer and renouncing his own mother, already showing him to be more of a stable ruler than his parents, whose decisions were swayed by their personal ties. Ultimately, the passions of all the players involved resulted in their downfall and their loss of power. For Edward and Isabel, their fatal failure was letting their passions rule their decisions, and for Gaveston and Mortimer, it was their weaponization of passion to rise above their stations.
Yes, of course. 1967, we are celebrating, aren't we, the 50th anniversary of the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality. But that did not apply in Scotland. Half the cast was breaking the law, weren't we? I had my boyfriend up there, we were breaking the law. It was obscene. And so it was with a special relish, I think, that I was involved in this, because I knew it was a sort of finger up at the establishment and the law that had prevailed and still did in Scotland. It was... But, I was in the closet. It was 20 years before I came out. There were no gay rights movements, standing outside with banners. If there had been, I'm not sure that I would have joined in with them. It's a foreign land 50 years ago.